Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The afternoon sun scorched the streets of Lagos, and the usual chaos of horns, shouting traders, and impatient drivers filled the air. Chisholm stood on the curb outside a luxury fashion store in Ikoyi, dressed in a striking yellow gown that hugged her curvy frame. Her long synthetic lashes batted impatiently while she tapped her heeled foot on the pavement. Her personal driver had just called to say he had a flat tire and wouldn't be able to pick her up. Fuming, she pulled out her phone and requested a taxi on a ride-hailing app, muttering under her breath about useless, poor excuses for men. Minutes later, an old Corolla with faded paint and rattling side mirrors pulled up. The man behind the wheel, a dark-skinned, bearded man in a plain polo, greeted her with a polite nod. "Madam, good afternoon," he said calmly. But Chisholm only scowled and rolled her eyes as she opened the back door with her freshly manicured fingers, muttering loud enough, "Of all the cars in Lagos, God just had to send this nonsense." As the car pulled into traffic, she began her assault. "You need to clean this car, and," she sneered, scanning the dashboard, "you're not even ashamed? You're carrying classy women like me in this thing? Look at your hands, so rough. Are you digging gutters before driving?" The man said nothing. He simply adjusted the rearview mirror and focused on the road, his face unreadable. But Chisholm wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and began recording, angling the camera subtly toward the driver while pretending to be on a video call. "See this one? Oh," she said, feigning laughter. "Some drivers will just use suffering to decorate their destiny. God forbid." Then she sent the clip to her girls' group chat captioned, "I deserve danger pay for this ride," faced with tears of joy. They erupted with laughing emojis and mocking replies, one of them even saying, "Hope you sprayed perfume after touching that seat." What Chisholm didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that the man driving her wasn't an ordinary taxi driver. Beneath the plain shirt, behind the quiet eyes, sat Chidi Obiaker, billionaire investor, owner of multiple offshore companies, and most importantly, the estranged elder brother of her husband, Keen. Chidi had returned to Nigeria just weeks ago after 3 years abroad, keeping a low profile to avoid media attention. He had always lived simply, believing that power didn't require noise. He preferred testing people's character when they didn't know who he was. Today, that test had begun, and Chisholm had failed spectacularly. Chidi didn't respond to her insults. He simply observed her tone, her entitlement, her complete lack of grace. He took her to her destination quietly, even opening the door when she exited, still mocking him. Then he watched as she strutted into the gates of a luxurious estate, one that looked chillingly familiar. Chidi's hand froze slightly on the steering wheel as he saw the black iron gates swing open and the security men salute the woman who had just insulted him. "Welcome, madam," one said with a wide smile. She nodded dismissively, not even looking their way, and walked confidently into the compound. The estate name, Obiaker Residences, was engraved in gold lettering above the gate. The sight punched the breath from Chidi's chest. This wasn't just any estate. This was his family's private residence, the one he had helped his brother Keen acquire years ago, before stepping away from the public eye. And this woman, this arrogant, mocking woman, was walking straight into it like she owned the world. Could it be? Chidi reached into the glove box for his old contact book, flipped through Keen's wedding invitation card, and confirmed the name, Mrs. Chisholm Obiaker. His heart thudded slowly. She was his brother's wife. For a long moment, Chidi sat in the car without moving. His thoughts clashed like thunder inside his mind. It wasn't just her rudeness, it was her arrogance, her mockery of the poor, the way she had smiled sweetly to the security men yet spat venom minutes earlier. Was this the woman Keen had chosen to build a home with? A woman who didn't just look down on others, but actively enjoyed crushing their dignity? He remembered their last conversation. Keen had spoken fondly of his new wife, saying she was humble and classy. Chidi had smiled on the phone from Paris, unable to attend the wedding due to a high-stakes deal. "You'll love her when you meet her, bro," Keen had said. And now, here she was, a woman who would have spat on him if he had asked for her number on the street. Chitty slowly started the engine, but something had shifted in him. This wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence. It was a revelation. He had stayed away from his brother's home for years, partly to protect his businesses from local interference, and partly due to personal grief from their late father's passing. But now, a deep responsibility tugged at him. His brother was blinded by beauty and charm, but Chitty had seen the truth under the surface, and he couldn't ignore it. Quietly, he made a decision. He would keep driving, not as a billionaire, not as Chitty Obiaker, but as a taxi driver. And he would let the truth reveal itself. After all, character isn't tested in light. It's revealed in darkness. Years earlier, Chitty had been Nigeria's most talked about young billionaire, a Harvard-trained economist, real estate mogul, and founder of 3 international tech companies. But after a brutal betrayal from a former fiancé who married him for money and later tried to poison him for his inheritance, Chitty had disappeared from public life. He stopped attending galas, deleted his social media, and moved most of his businesses abroad. He allowed his younger brother Keen to handle the family's legacy in Nigeria while he built quietly from behind the scenes. Chitty found peace in anonymity. Power, he realized, was more dangerous when it was invisible. He didn't need public applause anymore. He needed to observe people when they thought no one important was watching. When he first heard that Keen had married, he had been happy. He regretted missing the wedding, but business kept him far away. Keen had only sent a few pictures, none with Chisholm's face fully visible. "She's shy," Keen had said with a laugh. Chitty hadn't pressed. He trusted his brother's judgment. But now, face to face with the truth, he couldn't help but feel a growing ache in his chest. This was the woman his brother adored, and she had humiliated a man she thought was beneath her, all because of the car he drove and the clothes he wore. Chitty had seen enough of life to know how people treat those who can do nothing for them reveals who they truly are. In the days that followed, Chitty continued picking up rides in different areas. He deliberately kept his appearance the same: plain shirts, dusty shoes, old wristwatch. Each time he saw Chisholm's name pop up on his app, he accepted the request. And each time, she grew more brazen, complaining about the air freshener, flirting while talking to men on the phone, and even once joking, "Hope this man doesn't fall asleep while driving. He looks like poverty kept him awake all night." Chitty stayed silent, but inside, something burned. He watched as she laughed loudly on her phone, bragging about how some men don't know their wives are queens. And all the while, Chitty's heart broke, not for himself, but for Keen. His little brother was in love with a woman who wore a mask. And Chitty had made it his quiet mission to take off that mask, not with force, but with the one thing no lie can withstand: the truth. The scent of jollof rice and grilled chicken welcomed Chisholm as she stepped into her opulent kitchen that evening. The marble countertops gleamed, and the aroma of wealth and stability seemed to cling to the very walls of the Obiaker residence. She dropped her purse on the counter and adjusted her wig in the mirror, glancing at herself with smug satisfaction. The man who had driven her earlier, that so-called poverty on wheels, was now nothing but a memory and a joke for her friends. She had already forwarded the clip to more group chats and captioned it with, "Thank God I'm married rich. This world is not for everyone, Shah." The laughter from the emojis and voice notes she received made her feel superior, powerful even. But what truly filled her with pride was the life she had created for herself in this mansion. She had married Keen not just for his good looks and charm, but because she had recognized his rising influence and wealth. He was her ticket out of the muddy trenches of her past, and she was determined to never return. When Keen returned home that night, tired from a long board meeting, Chisholm was already waiting with a warm towel, a chilled drink, and a soft kiss on the lips. "You work too hard, baby," she purred, massaging his shoulders as he sank into the couch. Keen smiled, completely unaware of the events of her afternoon. He looked into her eyes and whispered, "You're everything I prayed for, Chisholm. Honestly, I don't know how I got so lucky." She responded with a coy smile, planting another kiss on his cheek. "Because you're a good man and you deserve a queen," she replied softly, her voice laced with practiced sincerity. They ate dinner together while watching the news, and she even offered to pray with him before bed, a performance she'd mastered to perfection. Inside the room they shared, she knelt beside him, hands folded in mock reverence. Meanwhile, the real Chisholm had left hours ago, back in the dusty Corolla, laughing and ridiculing a man she believed had no value. What Chisholm didn't know was that the very man she thought of as disposable had followed her home, not as a stalker, but as a brother. From across the street, Chitty sat quietly in a parked car, watching the house lights dim one by one. His mind raced, not with anger, but with sorrow. Keen's voice from their last conversation rang in his ears, full of trust, full of admiration for a woman who had fooled him completely. Chitty had always been protective of his younger brother. They had survived their parents' difficult divorce together, fought through early business failures together, and leaned on each other when their father passed. Keen was the gentle one, the forgiving one. Chitty had taken the harsher road. He learned how cruel the world could be. And now, seeing this mask that Chisholm wore so effortlessly, he felt an ache for the man sleeping inside the house, oblivious to the storm gathering right beneath his roof. In the weeks that followed, Chisholm's path continued to cross with Chitty's. Only she didn't know it. To her, he was just a regular taxi driver, one she barely glanced at unless she needed someone to dump her complaints on. On one particular Friday, she wore a revealing red dress and gold heels, ready for a business brunch at one of Lagos's high-end hotels. Her husband had gone out of town for a board retreat, and she needed a ride. When her regular driver didn't respond, she reluctantly opened the ride app again. Chitty accepted the request within seconds. As she entered the vehicle and noticed it was the same dusty driver again, she groaned loudly. "Ah, not you again," she snapped. "Why is it always you? Don't they have better cars in this company?" Chitty offered no reply. He simply started the engine and adjusted his mirror. The drive was filled with one-sided insults. "Look at the seats, all faded like your destiny," she murmured. "And this car smells like poverty and frustration. Can't you get something better? At least Uber drivers in Lekki try to smell like success. You just smell like survival." Chitty remained silent. He was beyond hurt now. He was studying her. Her face in the rearview mirror radiated vanity. Her words oozed condescension. And yet her phone calls revealed something more. She called a man named TOCHI, spoke flirtatiously, laughed about Keen being too slow and kind, and assured the man she'd meet him in room 206. By 2 p.m. Chitty clenched the steering wheel, but maintained his composure. She was planning to meet a lover. And the worst part? She didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. As they pulled into the hotel, she told Chitty to wait for her return, waving him off like a disposable servant. He parked nearby, shut off the engine, and waited not because he wanted revenge, but because he needed confirmation of what his heart already knew. 2 hours passed. Chitty sat silently in the car, watching people walk in and out of the hotel. Then she emerged, hair slightly tousled, lipstick faded, dress wrinkled. She walked quickly, adjusting her blouse and muttering something to herself. When she entered the car, she snapped her fingers. "Drive fast, I beg. I'm late for prayer meeting at church." Chitty blinked slowly, started the car, and drove off. Not a word was exchanged. But deep inside, Chitty had seen enough. This wasn't just about arrogance or pride anymore. It was deceit at its deepest level, and Keen deserved the truth. But Chitty knew his brother wouldn't believe it without proof. So that evening he gathered the recordings from the dashcam he had hidden in the vehicle, the conversations, the hotel drop-off, the phone calls, and saved them all in a folder titled, "For Keen. When he's ready." Chitty called Keen that evening and invited him to lunch the following day at a quiet restaurant in Victoria Island. It was their first face-to-face meeting since Chitty returned to Nigeria. Keen was overjoyed. "Finally, I thought you were going to disappear again," he laughed over the phone. They met at a garden-side table, surrounded by the gentle splash of a fountain and the distant hum of traffic. Chitty looked older, more grounded, with faint silver creeping into his beard, but his eyes remained sharp. Keen, still full of youthful energy and trust, hugged him tightly. They talked about business, old memories, and their father's legacy. Then, over dessert, Chitty leaned in. "Tell me about Chisholm," he said calmly. Keen smiled. "She's a gift from God. Loyal, elegant, supportive. Honestly, I've never felt this loved in my life. Chitty nodded slowly, sipping his water. And if she wasn't who you thought she was? Would you want to know? Keen frowned slightly. What do you mean? Chitty placed his spoon down carefully. Not everything that glitters is gold, Keen. Sometimes gold is hidden in dust, and sometimes dust wears diamonds. I just want you to look closer. Keen grew uncomfortable. Chitty, she's not perfect. But she's trying. Don't tell me you're listening to gossip or assumptions. Chitty sighed. I'm not. I've seen her. I've spoken with her. Just observe her, okay? Don't be blind because of love. Love needs truth to survive. Keen nodded, but his expression was tense. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Chitty knew it would take time for it to grow. Later that night, Keen returned home and studied Chisholm more carefully. She greeted him warmly, offered to massage his shoulders, then quickly excused herself to take a church call in another room. Keen watched her go, eyes now sharpened by his brother's words. In his heart, he didn't want to believe anything negative about her, but something had shifted. Meanwhile, Chitty sat in his home office, replaying the recordings, preparing the files. He didn't want to destroy a marriage. He wanted to protect his brother from living a lie. And somewhere deep down he hoped that maybe, just maybe, there was still time for redemption. But he also knew time has a strange way of exposing everything in the end. Chitty pulled into the familiar hotel driveway again, his eyes masked behind a pair of plain black sunglasses. The day was quiet, the sun high in the sky, casting sharp shadows against the pavement. When Chisholm entered the car, dressed in a silk blouse and tight skirt, her makeup perfectly contoured, he already knew where she was headed. 206, she said bluntly, without making eye contact, her fingers busy scrolling through her phone. Chitty said nothing. His silence had become his weapon, one she hadn't yet noticed. As they drove, she spoke on the phone in a low voice to someone named Tochi, the same man from previous recordings. Don't keep me waiting like last time, she giggled. You know I'm risking everything for you, right? Chitty clenched his jaw behind the wheel, his stomach turning as he listened to her flirt, mocking Keen as boring and slow. She ended the call just before they reached the hotel, touched up her lipstick, and adjusted her blouse. Wait for me, she commanded as she exited the car, not bothering to close the door properly behind her. Chitty waited, his heart weighed down by a mixture of fury and sorrow. The hours passed slowly, each minute a cruel reminder of what his brother believed versus what reality had become. He thought of Keen's voice, the way it softened when he mentioned his wife, the tenderness he showed her at dinner, the admiration he shared with Chitty just days ago. She grounds me, bro, Keen had once said. She's not like other women. She sees the heart, not the wealth. Chitty now knew that was a lie, but it wasn't his brother's lie. It was Chisholm's performance. And it had worked, until now. After almost 2 hours, she returned, looking flushed and distracted. She gave no explanation, only muttered, "Let's go," and climbed into the car, acting as though nothing happened. But the damage had been done. And this time, Chitty wasn't just collecting data. He was preparing for war, not with fists or rage, but with undeniable, recorded truth. That evening, Chitty sat in his dimly lit study, laptop open, files neatly arranged. He had everything. Voice recordings of her phone calls, dashcam footage of the hotel rendezvous, screenshots of the ride logs, even timestamps of repeated locations. He titled the folder for Keen, When the Blindfold Lifts, and saved it on a password-protected USB drive. But he didn't send it yet. Not out of hesitation, but because he knew the weight of what it carried. It wasn't just a wife's betrayal that would be exposed, but the shattering of a dream his brother had built with love, trust, and hope. Chitty stared at the screen for a long time, then leaned back and closed his eyes. The next move wouldn't just change Keen's marriage, it would change everything. He just had to make sure his brother was ready. 2 days passed before Chitty made his decision. The images had haunted his dreams. He watched Keen laugh over lunch with their cousins, still talking fondly about Chisholm, still unaware of the cracks forming beneath his foundation. That same night, Chitty slipped the USB drive into a small envelope and wrote a short note. Watch alone. Don't let your heart speak first. Let the truth speak. He had it delivered to Keen's office by a trusted assistant without revealing its origin. The hours ticked by. Chitty didn't hear back immediately. He imagined the moment Keen would sit behind his glass desk, insert the USB, and slowly begin to understand that the woman he had trusted was not the woman he had married. The footage was clear, the audio sharp. There was no room for doubt or denial. But that clarity also brought pain, a kind of pain no brother wanted to be the source of. That evening, Chitty received a call from an unknown number. When he picked up, he heard nothing at first. Then came a single question, broken and hollow. "How long have you known?" It was Keen's voice, strained, betrayed, fragile. Chitty exhaled. "Long enough," he replied gently. There was a pause. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Keen whispered. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself," Chitty said. "If I told you, you would have defended her. But the camera doesn't lie, Keen." The silence that followed was long and suffocating. Chitty didn't push further. He knew what his brother was going through. The mix of anger, confusion, and the shattering sound of trust collapsing. Keen ended the call without another word. That night, neither of them slept. Keen sat alone in his home office, watching the clips over and over. The woman he kissed every morning, the one who prayed beside him and massaged his feet, was meeting another man in a hotel room, laughing at his naivety, and calling herself single. The heartbreak hit harder than any slap. But even deeper than the betrayal was the humiliation, knowing that the one person he looked up to, his brother, had been the one she disrespected publicly and shamelessly. Keen buried his face in his hands, tears streaming silently down his face. Everything he believed about love, loyalty, and his own judgment now stood in ruins. The next morning, he told Chisholm they would be having a dinner, and his elder brother would finally be attending. He didn't say much more. He just kissed her on the forehead and said, "Make sure you look your best. He's the one I want you to impress." The mask she wore widened into a smile, unaware that her final performance was about to begin. Chisholm couldn't contain her excitement. For weeks, she had been dropping subtle hints to Keen about meeting his elusive elder brother, the billionaire investor she had only heard stories about. People in their social circle called him the ghost mogul, wealthy beyond imagination, powerful in silence, and so private that even the media couldn't track him. She had imagined what he'd look like a dozen times, tall, handsome, and charming, with eyes that hinted at royalty. If she could impress him, she knew she could secure even more influence. "Maybe he'll love me enough to invest in my fashion brand," she giggled to herself as she sorted through her best dresses. She chose a midnight blue bodycon gown with a high slit and sparkling earrings. Her hair was freshly styled, makeup flawless, and her perfume the most expensive bottle in her collection. She practiced her smile in the mirror and rehearsed polite compliments to charm him. Tonight, she would be unforgettable. Keen didn't say much that evening. He simply watched her, nodding as she fluttered about, perfecting the setting. "You've never looked more radiant," he said with a soft, unreadable expression. Chisholm beamed and kissed his cheek. "I just want your brother to know you married well," she said, adjusting his tie for him. At 7:04 p.m., the doorbell rang. Chisholm rushed to check her reflection one last time, took a deep breath, and opened the door, only for the blood in her veins to turn to ice. Standing before her was the man she had insulted countless times, the man whose car she had mocked, whose presence she had sneered at, the taxi driver. But tonight he stood tall in an Italian suit, with polished shoes, an expensive timepiece, and an air of quiet power that filled the room before he even stepped in. Chisholm's knees weakened. Her mouth fell open, but no words came out. "Good evening, Mrs. Obiaker," Chitty said calmly, stepping past her into the house. Keen stood nearby, watching her reaction. Her hands trembled. This can't be," she stammered, barely able to breathe. Keen's voice cut through the silence. "Meet my elder brother, Chitty Obiaker, the man you've been dying to impress." Chisholm turned to look at her husband, hoping it was a joke. But his expression was cold, hard, and heartbreakingly distant. Her world crumbled in slow motion. All her lies, all her mockery, all her secrets were now standing in the same room. And this time, no amount of perfume or practiced grace could hide the stench of her deceit. The air in the dining room was heavy, as if truth itself had entered and refused to leave. Chisholm stood frozen by the door, her hands trembling so violently that the bracelet on her wrist slipped off unnoticed. Chitty took his seat calmly at the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks with grace, completely unbothered by the discomfort saturating the atmosphere. Keen, still quiet, motioned to Chisholm to sit down. She obeyed slowly, sinking into the chair across from Chitty as if gravity had suddenly doubled in weight. The long dining table, decorated with candlelight and gold-rimmed dishes, suddenly felt more like an altar of judgment than a celebration. Her perfectly lined lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was dry, her pulse erratic, and her confidence, the very cloak she had always worn with pride, had been stripped away with just one look at Chitty. Dinner began, but hardly anyone ate. The silence was suffocating. Chitty responded only when spoken to, and even then, with polite restraint. Keen, in contrast, maintained a chilling composure, watching Chisholm as she stumbled through small talk about fashion, trying to shift the mood back to normal. "I've heard so much about you, sir," she said with a forced smile, attempting to salvage the moment. "Your success is truly an inspiration." Chitty raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He took a sip of wine, then calmly replied, "Thank you. Though I must admit, I prefer to be judged by how I treat others, not just my bank account." That line hit like a slap, and Chisholm flinched slightly. Keen didn't respond. Instead, he wiped his lips with a napkin and glanced at her. "Chisholm, didn't you say you had met my brother's driver before?" The question came like a knife, cutting straight through her practice charm. Her mouth quivered as she whispered, I didn't know it was him." The weight of truth collapsed on her like a falling ceiling. She turned to Chitty, eyes pleading now, searching for mercy in his gaze. But he gave her none, only stillness. "You didn't know," he echoed slowly, nodding. "And yet you knew enough to call him names, to laugh at his clothes, his hands, his car. You knew enough to talk about your husband behind his back, to mock his kindness. And all while wearing his ring on your finger." Chisholm's eyes welled up with tears. Keen stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to them both. Chisholm reached out toward him. "Keen, I didn't mean to," but he raised a hand to silence her. "Let's not ruin what's already broken," he said, his voice flat. "Dinner's over." The plates remained untouched, the candles flickering quietly like solemn witnesses to a truth that could no longer be buried. The silence in the mansion that night was unbearable. Chisholm paced the bedroom floor barefoot, her wig abandoned on the bed, her once flawless makeup now smeared across her cheeks. Her dress, tight and glittering under normal lights, now looked like a costume, a mockery of the woman she had tried to be. Keen hadn't spoken to her since walking away from the dinner table. He'd gone straight to the guest room, leaving her alone with her shame. She kept replaying every moment, every insult she had hurled at Chitty, every cruel laugh, every flirtatious call made in the back of his car. She had thought she was in control, untouchable even, because she believed she had married into power. But the true power had sat quietly behind the wheel the whole time, and she had spat in its face without knowing. She tried to compose herself, whispering to her own reflection in the mirror, "It's not over. I just have to explain myself. I have to make them understand." But even as she said it, a deeper voice within her told her the truth. They had seen who she was. She walked to the guest room, knocked gently, and entered when there was no answer. Keen was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the USB drive in his hand, the one Chitty had sent him. "I don't even know who you are," he said without looking at her. "You walk in here every night and act like you care about me. You pray with me. You feed me. You lie next to me. And then you go out laughing about me, meeting other men." Chisholm dropped to her knees. "Keen, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was trying to feel powerful. You're always busy. I felt lonely. But I swear I love you." "Don't insult me with that word," Keen snapped, his voice breaking. "Love? Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't sleep in one bed and sneak into another." He stood up, tossing the USB onto the bed like a curse. You married me for wealth. Admit it. You saw a man on the rise and jumped in. And now you've been exposed. Chisholm sobbed harder, grabbing the hem of his shirt. Please, Keen. Don't throw me away. I can change. I will change. He stepped back. You don't need to convince me. You need to convince the person in the mirror. Because I'm not sure she even knows who she is anymore. And with that, he walked past her, leaving her on the floor in tears. Her throne had crumbled, and all that remained was the woman beneath the crown, flawed, fragile, and now exposed for all to see. The next morning, Chisholm awoke alone. The silence in the mansion felt louder than any confrontation could. She checked her phone and found dozens of missed calls and messages, not from friends, but from gossip blogs. Someone had leaked clips from the dashcam footage. Perhaps it was one of the hotel staff or someone from the rideshare system. Either way, the internet had seen her, laughing cruelly at the taxi driver, mocking her husband, and walking into a hotel with another man. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Her modeling endorsement had already posted a statement distancing themselves from her. The fashion brand she'd hoped to launch messaged her politely. Due to recent events, we'll be postponing all collaborative efforts indefinitely. Her world was collapsing. And for the first time in years, Chisholm had no power to stop it. She packed a few bags and left the mansion without saying goodbye, her face covered with dark glasses and a scarf. She went to her old friend Ada's place, hoping for refuge. But even Ada gave her side eyes of silent judgment. You messed up, babe, Ada said bluntly. You had everything. And now you're a meme. Chisholm curled up on the guest room bed, her face buried in a pillow, muffling her cries. The more she scrolled online, the worse it got. People were dissecting her marriage, her lies, her arrogance. Her past photos, with captions like wife goals and God when, were now being turned into sarcastic jokes. She had built her image on a lie, and now the internet was ripping it apart piece by piece. She considered calling Keen, but realized she had nothing left to say. Not now. Not yet. In that quiet moment of humiliation, Chisholm did something she hadn't done in years. She knelt to pray. Not for restoration of fame, but for clarity. God, who am I now? She whispered through tears. I'm not the woman I used to be. I don't want to be her again. But please show me who I'm meant to become. She cried until there were no more tears, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel angry or defensive. She felt broken, but open. The arrogance had shattered. The facade had cracked. Now in that quiet, unfamiliar space, something else could finally begin to grow. Humility. But apologies, she knew, could not undo the damage. They could only offer the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left to rebuild. Chisholm had never stared at her own reflection for so long. Sitting on the edge of Ada's small guest bed with her knees pressed together and hair tied back in a makeshift scarf, she looked less like the boss wife Instagram once knew and more like a girl who had just survived a storm, because she had. Her once perfectly arched eyebrows were bare, her lips cracked, and her eyes dull and swollen from days of weeping. No makeup, no filters, no jewelry. Just a woman stripped of pride and image. As she stared into the mirror, the memories came rushing like a flood she could no longer block. She remembered standing in a cramped one-room apartment as a teenager, watching her mother clean people's homes for pennies. She remembered vowing, at just 15, that she would never be poor again, that she would rise, no matter the cost, even if she had to become someone else to do it. But somewhere between survival and success, Chisholm had lost herself. She became obsessed with perception, how she looked, what people thought of her, how much status her man had. Keen was the prize she had chosen to protect that image, and when that no longer satisfied her hunger for validation, she turned to attention from strangers, expensive clothes, designer labels, and flattery from men she never respected. And yet, now that everything had been taken from her, the mansion, the admiration, the social clout, she was left with the only person she couldn't lie to, herself. Tears slowly slid down her cheeks as she whispered to the mirror, I don't even know who I am anymore. That voice, once so bold and confident, now cracked like glass under pressure. It was her truth, raw and terrifying. It was in this vulnerable silence that Chisholm began to write. A letter, not to Keen, not to Chitty, but to the girl she used to be. "I'm sorry," she wrote shakily. "I'm sorry I buried you beneath greed and pride. I'm sorry I thought you were enough. You were kind. You were hopeful. You just wanted to be loved." She wrote for hours, pouring out every lie she had told, every mask she had worn, every person she had hurt, including herself. The pages were tear-stained, but honest. For the first time in years, Chisholm confronted her own reflection not with disgust or performance, but with remorse. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know if Keen would ever forgive her. But she knew one thing. She would no longer chase image over identity. If she was ever going to rebuild her life, it would have to start with something she had abandoned long ago: authenticity. While Chisholm wrestled with self-awareness in Ada's guest room, Keen was fighting his own battle, not with her, but within himself. He hadn't eaten much since the night of the dinner, and though he put on a brave face at work, his heart was a war zone of disappointment, sorrow, and confusion. He sat in his office, the USB drive still sitting beside his laptop like a ghost that refused to vanish. He had watched every clip Chitty had compiled. Not once, not twice, but at least 10 times. And every time it broke him. He didn't just see a cheating wife. He saw the woman he had loved laugh at his trust, mock his kindness, and disrespect his family. It was betrayal on every possible level. But the part that hurt the most wasn't the affair. It was that she never once looked like she regretted it until she got caught. That was the wound that refused to close. Chitty visited him again, this time without a USB or proof, just brotherly concern. They sat in silence for a long while before Keen finally spoke. "I loved her, Chitty. I really did." His voice cracked as he rubbed his temples. "She made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe I saw only what I wanted to see." Chitty exhaled and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You weren't foolish, Keen. You were hopeful. There's nothing foolish about believing in someone. But hope must be earned. Trust must be guarded. And love must never be blind." Keen nodded slowly, staring at a framed picture of him and Chisholm from their wedding day. "Do you think people really change?" he asked. Chitty didn't answer immediately. "I think pain is the greatest teacher," he finally said. "And if she's truly feeling it, maybe she's learning." That night, Keen found himself standing outside the church where he and Chisholm had once prayed together before getting married. He sat at the back pew, staring at the altar, wrestling with the pain in his heart. Despite everything, he still cared. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to see her destroyed. But he also didn't know if he could ever trust her again. "God, help me," he whispered under his breath. "Not just to forgive, but to decide wisely. I don't want to be bitter, but I can't be blind either." And in that quiet moment, a part of him softened. Not toward her actions, but toward the idea that maybe, just maybe, something broken could still be healed. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a step toward something that hurt less than hatred: peace. Chisholm stood at the entrance of her childhood home in ABA, holding a nylon bag of fruits and medication. The house hadn't changed: rusted zinc roof, faded paint, a small compound filled with the familiar scent of burnt firewood and palm oil. Her mother, Mama Ifyananya, sat on a plastic chair under the mango tree, her face tired but kind. The moment she saw her daughter, her brows furrowed. "Chisholm, what are you doing here? Why do you look like this?" Chisholm dropped to her knees and embraced her, tears pouring freely. "Mama, I messed up." She couldn't hold it in any longer. She laid her head on her mother's lap like a child, sobbing uncontrollably. Mama Ifyananya held her close, gently stroking her back. "Talk to me, Nwam. What happened?" And there, under the mango tree, with the hum of crickets in the background, Chisholm poured out everything: the lies, the affair, the exposure, and the humiliation. When she finished, her mother sat in silence, her weathered fingers tapping slowly against Chisholm's shoulder. "So all the pride you've been walking around with, it finally came back to slap you, she said, her voice calm but firm. Chisholm nodded, ashamed. "Mama, I wanted to be someone. I didn't want to be like you, struggling, begging for respect. I thought marrying rich would make me powerful." Her mother's eyes softened, but her words were sharp. "You think I didn't want better too? But dignity isn't about how much money you have, Chisholm. It's about how you treat others, even when you're angry, even when no one is watching." She lifted her daughter's chin. "You became the very thing I prayed you'd never be, someone who looks down on others. You forgot where you came from." Chisholm's tears returned, but this time they weren't from shame, they were from release. Her mother didn't yell. She didn't reject her. She spoke the truth in love, the kind that wounds and heals all at once. They spent the rest of the day together, cooking, talking, and laughing. For the first time in years, Chisholm felt grounded, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she was finally being real. As she prepared to leave, her mother hugged her tightly and whispered, "Fix your heart before you try to fix your marriage. Let God meet you where you are, not where you pretend to be." Chisholm nodded, holding back new tears. It wasn't just a visit to her mother. It was a return to her roots, to the place where truth still lived. And for the first time in a long time, she was listening. Chisholm stood outside the gates of Chitty's private residence, her hands trembling as she clutched the small purse that now contained the last of her pride. The neighborhood was quiet and well guarded, a world far removed from the chaos she had created. She had called ahead, unsure if he would even agree to see her. But to her surprise, he had sent back a one-word reply: "Come." Now that she was here, however, her courage began to drain. Dressed in a simple ankle-length gown and her natural hair tied back in a bun, she looked nothing like the flamboyant woman who once laughed in his car. A guard ushered her through, and she was led into a serene, sunlit room where Chitty sat behind a mahogany desk, flipping through documents. When he looked up and met her eyes, she nearly collapsed from the weight of shame. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Chitty gestured to the seat opposite him, without a word. She sat slowly, every movement deliberate, as if even her body had to beg for mercy. "I don't deserve to be here," she began, the silence pressing down like a heavy curtain. "But I needed to apologize, not because I got caught, not because the world turned against me, but because I finally see what I've become." Her voice cracked. "I mocked you, insulted you, used your brother's love for status, and played a dangerous game with people's hearts. You didn't owe me anything, but you gave me truth. And I want to say I'm sorry, not to restore my image, but because I finally understand the damage I caused." She lowered her head, a tear sliding down her cheek. "You were kind even when I was cruel." Chitty leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as he studied her. His expression remained unreadable. After a long pause, he spoke quietly. "You came here for forgiveness, but you asked the wrong person." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Chitty nodded toward the window, where the sun filtered through sheer curtains. "You married Keene. You betrayed Keene. You lied to Keene. I was just a mirror, revealing the truth. If there's someone who deserves an apology, it's him." Chisholm wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "I understand. I just wanted you to know I regret everything." Chitty's gaze softened just slightly. "Then let your actions speak," he said. "Words are easy. Change takes work." As she stood to leave, he added quietly, "This is your chance. Not to be who you were, but to become who you should have been all along." That single sentence followed her out the door like a shadow of conviction and a whisper of hope. Later that week, Chitty sat at his writing desk with the weight of everything he had witnessed pressing on his chest. Despite his composed nature, the experience had left its mark. He had seen wealth and status turn men into monsters, but this was personal. It involved family, trust, and the kind of heartbreak no business negotiation could fix. With a sigh, he reached for a clean sheet of paper and began to write. The letter was not emotional. It was clear, honest, and deeply deliberate. He titled it simply, "For My Brother." In it, he outlined everything he had observed, not just Chisholm's betrayal, but her transformation, her visit to their childhood home, her quiet plea for redemption. He didn't defend her, but he didn't destroy her either. "There is still damage," he wrote, "but I believe there may also be a seed of remorse trying to bloom." The letter continued, I can't tell you what to do, Keen. This is your life, your love, your decision. But I ask you to remember the man you are, the one who believes in second chances, who helped me through my darkest business days, who forgave our father when we couldn't. Maybe this pain is showing you something you were never meant to ignore, that sometimes love has to be broken before it can be rebuilt. And if it can't be rebuilt, at least let it end with dignity, not hatred. Chitty folded the letter carefully and placed it on the dining table of Keen's apartment before leaving the keys on the counter. He had been staying with Keen for a few days while they talked through the chaos, but he knew it was time to step away. This was no longer his story. It was Keen's journey now, and the man he knew as a brother had to choose which road to take. When Keen arrived home that evening, exhausted from an unusually silent board meeting, he found the letter waiting for him beside a glass of untouched water. He read it slowly, each line cutting and comforting in equal measure. He paced the room for nearly an hour afterward, staring at nothing, playing old memories in his mind like a private film reel. He thought of their first date, how Chisholm laughed at his jokes, how she had seemed so genuine. He remembered the morning she cried when his mother was hospitalized, and how he'd held her, believing no woman could love him more deeply. He now understood that parts of it were real, and other parts carefully performed. But was redemption possible? Could love grow again where trust had once been severed? The letter didn't answer that question, but it did leave him with something else, the freedom to decide with his own heart, not his pride. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. The staff moved carefully around Keen as he sat on the garden bench, deep in thought. He held the letter from Chitty in one hand and his wedding ring in the other. His heart was conflicted, a battlefield of memory, betrayal, and a faint hope that maybe what was broken didn't have to be discarded. He hadn't spoken to Chisholm since the night of the dinner, though he had seen her apology interviews and read the harsh commentary circulating online. Still, her silence since then, no grand gestures, no manipulative stunts, no sudden tears for public sympathy, intrigued him. For a woman who once needed attention to breathe, she had suddenly gone quiet. Maybe, just maybe, she was reflecting. But Keen also knew that not every apology deserved reconciliation, and not every sin deserved a second home. Later that afternoon, he made a phone call. His voice was steady. "Come to the house," he told her. "But don't come with makeup or excuses. Come with truth." When Chisholm arrived, she wore a simple blouse and ankle-length skirt. Her natural hair was braided neatly, and her eyes, once fierce and confident, now held something gentler. Not weakness, but humility. She didn't enter with a speech. She simply stood in front of him and waited. Keen looked at her for a long moment before asking, "If I wasn't rich, would you have loved me?" The question was sharp, and she flinched as if it had been thrown. She took a deep breath. "If I had met the man you are now, but you had nothing, yes. I believe I would have. But the woman I was when we met? No. She wouldn't have even looked twice. And that's why I needed to change. Not for you. For me." Her answer was honest, painfully so, and it stirred something in Keen he wasn't prepared for. He stood and walked past her toward the veranda, staring out at the lawn. "You broke something in me, Chisholm. But I'm not trying to punish you. I just need to know that if we move forward, it won't be the same game, you pretending and me believing." She joined him slowly, standing beside him but not touching him. "I can't promise you I'll be perfect," she whispered. "But I can promise that I'll be real. No more hiding. No more masks. If you'll let me, I'll rebuild this brick by brick." Keen looked at her, his expression unreadable, then finally nodded once. "We won't go back to the way it was. We'll start from zero, and we'll see if what's left is still worth saving." And just like that, not with romance or fireworks, but with raw truth, the possibility of redemption took its first quiet breath. The days that followed were anything but easy. Chisholm didn't return to the mansion immediately. She respected Keen's decision to take things slowly, to rebuild from zero. Instead, she rented a modest room near the outskirts of town and began volunteering at a local orphanage, not to win attention or earn praise, but to humble herself and do something that didn't center around vanity. She washed floors, served food, helped the children with homework, and listened to the stories of young girls abandoned by those they trusted. Every time she looked into their eyes, she saw a piece of herself, the version of her that longed to be loved, that feared rejection, that had once lived for survival. At night, she returned to her small room, exhausted but strangely at peace. It wasn't wealth or comfort, but it was healing. To further prove her transformation to herself, not just to Keen, Chisholm took up a part-time job as a cashier at a local supermarket. Her first week was filled with whispers and side eyes. Some customers recognized her, the once glamorous wife of a millionaire now scanning yams and sardines at the register. She endured the humiliation silently, letting each insult cleanse her pride. A former friend who once begged to borrow her heels now mocked her openly on Instagram, posting a photo captioned, "Life comes at you fast." But Chisholm didn't flinch. The old her would have clapped back with a public post. This version kept her head down and stayed focused. She found strength not in applause, but in the quiet resilience of showing up every day. And gradually, she began to smile again, not the smile meant to impress or manipulate, but a smile that came from an internal peace, a gratitude for the second chance to live truthfully. Back at the mansion, Keen was watching from afar. He didn't intervene, didn't rush to bring her back or flaunt her transformation to the world. Instead, he observed. He asked the orphanage head about her work, visited the supermarket anonymously once just to see her in action. She didn't see him, but he watched her help an elderly woman pack groceries with patience and warmth. It moved him, not because she was perfect now, but because she was real. One evening, as he sat in the same garden where he once held her wedding ring in doubt, he thought to himself, maybe people don't change overnight. But maybe some people, when broken properly, begin to heal into someone better than they were. And that thought, soft, simple, and honest, became the bridge that connected the man he once was to the man who could forgive. Not because he had forgotten the pain, but because he had finally seen the growth. It was a small gathering. No chandeliers, no red carpets, no news cameras. Just close family, a few church members, and the sound of soft violins filling the garden behind Keen's estate. The invitation simply read, a renewal of truth. Chitty sat quietly in the front row, dressed in a white linen suit, a faint smile playing on his lips. He had watched the story unfold with patience, offering guidance only when asked. When Chisholm walked down the garden aisle this time, there was no trail of expensive perfume or designer shoes. Only a clean white gown, simple braids tucked into a low bun, and eyes that had wept and healed. There were no followers live-streaming her walk, no stylists fixing her hem. She held a small bouquet of sunflowers, and every step she took felt like redemption in motion. Beside the altar, Keen stood, steady, strong, and no longer naive. He wasn't marrying the same woman. He was making peace with a new one. As they exchanged vows again, there were no dramatic speeches or flowery promises. Just raw words. "I vow to see you," Keen said, taking her hands in his. "Not the version you present to the world, but the one you're still becoming. I may never forget what we lost, but I'm willing to build something new with what's left." Chisholm's voice quivered as she responded, "I vow to never lie to you, even with silence. I won't try to be perfect, but I will be present and real. For the first time in my life, I am choosing truth over image. And I choose you not because I need you to make me whole, but because I want to grow beside you." Chitty turned his face away briefly to blink back tears. Even he, the one who had once worn disappointment like armor, could feel the weight of this moment. After the ceremony, the guests celebrated with quiet joy. There were no choreographed dances or clinking champagne glasses, just heartfelt hugs, laughter, and stories. Chisholm walked up to Chitty and bowed her head slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not exposing me with anger, but with truth." Chitty smiled. "Thank the man who gave you another chance, and the God who broke you just enough to bring you here." As the evening sun dipped below the skyline, Chisholm walked toward the car that had been parked at the gate, not a luxury ride, but the same old Corolla she once mocked. She opened the back door for an elderly guest, smiled, and said, Please, let me serve you. That moment, captured silently by Chitty's phone, was never posted online. It remained private, a personal reminder that sometimes redemption doesn't come through applause, but through humility, grace, and the courage to begin again. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.